Hi everyone, welcome to a second part of our blog for this day. We've got two for the price of one today. Thank you to Howard for his first part of the blog, talking about Franciscan spirituality. I hope the day's gone well for you, my friend, and that wonderful way that Francis offered us of simplicity, chastity and obedience. And then I want to talk about these three gifts: gold, frankincense and myrrh for a moment. Because really what Howard was talking about speaks into what I'm about to talk to now, and we'll come back to this in the end. The reason is because Francis loved nativity plays. In fact, many of the reasons why we've got nativity plays and nativity scenes these days is because of Francis reintroducing it to the Western Church in the 13th century. We'll come back to this a bit later. But of course, those gifts of gold, frankincense and myrrh, when I talk to children about what they know about Christmas and the Christmas story, often the one thing they will remember is the gold, frankincense and myrrh. It's almost something they rattle off for us, whether they fully understand what the significance of the gifts are or not. What's interesting is that right from the earliest times, from a gentleman called Irenaeus, these three gifts represented Jesus as king, Jesus as God, and of course the myrrh pointing to his burial. And I want to focus in upon the myrrh for a moment, because what's interesting about the myrrh is that it comes from the same sort of idea of gum and taken from a tree way down in the southern part of Arabia and into places like Ethiopia and Eritrea and Somalia. And like the frankincense, it was brought up on great camel trains up to Petra, and then from Petra to Gaza and shipped to Western Europe. The myrrh was used at Jesus' burial. We know that Nicodemus used about 100 pounds of myrrh and spices, costing an enormous amount of money for Jesus' burial. We also know that Jesus was offered wine mixed with myrrh in Mark's Gospel when he was about to die on the cross. What's interesting, and Paula Gooder points this out in her work, is that if the myrrh that was given to Jesus at his birth was so significant with his death and burial, surely he would have referred to it again when he came to the cross. But interestingly, Matthew doesn't. Matthew talks about wine and gall. Gall is taken from a plant-based substance rather than from a tree, and it's very bitter. And it was used as an anaesthetic. I can never say that word, anaesthetic. So what's going on here? Maybe, says Paula Gooder, and I think she may be right, at least there is a double meaning, or maybe the real meaning was less to do with Jesus' burial with the myrrh. It was actually more closely aligned with the frankincense. The reason is, in the temple in Jerusalem, from the very earliest of times, the frankincense was mixed with myrrh to create something called the ketoret, which was the incense that was used to burn on the altar before God. In other words, the prayers of the people before God. Taking this understanding, maybe Matthew's pointing us to the fact that Jesus is the new high priest that will actually be faithful in prayer, both from his own day, today and forever. In the letter to the Hebrews, which is another document like Matthew's Gospel, written particularly for a Jewish community, this idea of Jesus, the new high priest, the new temple, actually is very important. And there's a lot of talk about that in Hebrews chapter 5, if you want to look it up. But this idea that Jesus then is faithful in his prayer right now for people in hospital, for people in care homes, for people in their own homes, holding the prayers of all humanity and indeed all creation before God. And when we join in our prayer life, well, actually that's joining in with Jesus in his. I love that idea, that thought. And this is where it comes back to what Howard was sharing with us. The simplicity of stripping everything else away, that it becomes ultimately about our prayer. The fact that it is pure, not because our prayers are perfect, but because we're joining in with Jesus' own prayer, in faithfulness, in unself-consciousness, and in the moment, just doing what it says on the tin. And finally, in obedience. Jesus, we know from Scripture, was so faithful in his prayer all his life. And there are times when we are, and there's times when we're not. But isn't it wonderful to think that Jesus is on this 24/7, through all that we're going through at the moment, but also into the world that we hopefully, the new world we hopefully will become. It's a wonderful thought, and it was all there in those three gifts, perhaps, at his birth, revealing his true nature and true identity, that we too can listen with him to the very heartbeat of God. Have a good rest of the day. God bless. Bye.